Are you working too much? Yeah, I thought so. It's so easy to get caught up in the cult of overwork, which is why we need to be reminded how to structure our work and lives to get back to the balance we know is possible. This is the 5 a.m. Miracle, episode number 395. 5 Principles to Defeat Overwork with Megan Hyatt Miller. Good morning, I am Jeff Sanders, and this is the podcast dedicated to dominating your day before breakfast. My guest today is the president and CEO at Megan Hyatt Company and the co-host of the popular business podcast, Lead to Win. She is also Michael's oldest daughter. And as the architect of Megan Hyatt Company's standout culture, she is committed to helping her team win at work and succeed at life, while also delivering phenomenal results to their customers. When she's not taking the company to new heights, she's fully present at home with her husband Joel and 5 kids in Franklin, Tennessee. And now here's my interview with Megan Hyatt Miller.
Hey, Jeff, it's so good to be with you today. I'm excited to talk.
Definitely excited I'm in the show today. It's going to be a lot of fun. And the first kind of big thing I want to get to is the topic at hand, which is the new book, which you have co-authored with your father, Megan Hyatt. And the book is called Win at Work and Succeed at Life, 5 Principles to Free Yourself from the Cult of Overwork. First of all, it's a great title.
Thank you.
Second of all, I think it fits this show really, really well, specifically from this angle of overwork. And I think that the topic of working too much is one that has spanned my personal life, certainly, but also with this show over the years. And why do you think that overwork is such a common thing? Like, how have we found ourselves in that position so frequently?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few reasons. I mean, the first one is that we live in a culture that tells us that work is the primary orientation of our life. You know, we're either getting ready to work, working, or recovering from working. And so I think that's just kind of the prevailing attitude in our culture. I also think that there kind of has become a status symbol, particularly for high achievers, around something we call in the book the hustle fallacy. You know, that whole idea of hustle, you see it hashtagged on social media, you see people talking about it, like complaining, but like really bragging about how tired they are because of how much they work. I think we get a lot of significance and meaning from overwork. And I also think that we live in a culture that's always on. You know, all these devices that we have and all this technology was supposed to enable us to work less, but in reality, it's just enabled us to work anywhere, which there are certainly benefits to that, but there are also trade-offs. And the trade-offs are, unless you kind of really become the master of your technology, it can find you anywhere, you know, and the edges between your professional life and your personal life can become very, very blurry. I think a lot of us experience that sort of, you know, like all over the place in 2020. And it can be difficult to have boundaries. It can be difficult to stop and to even be aware that we haven't stopped working, that it just gets so kind of bled together that it's a mess. So, yeah.
Yeah, along those lines of boundaries, I know one of the issues people have experienced who are now either working from home or have been for a while. I mean, I made that shift myself about 7 years ago. Wow. And it's definitely a challenge when you realize no one is telling me when to go to lunch. No one's telling me when to clock out. There's no set rules for a lot of us. And so how do we kind of establish even boundaries at our house to make sure that work and home life don't just kind of mush together as one big blob?
Yeah, well, I think it's really challenging. And for the first time probably ever in our history, we're all figuring this out together, you know, and I think that's a good thing and certainly has some challenges. You know, one of the things we talk about in this book, Win at Work and Succeed at Life, is the idea of constraints as being something to embrace rather than fight. And I think as we all kind of step into this place of remote work and or even some kind of hybrid, that we need to impose constraints on our day when we start working and when we stop working. And that's a new concept for a lot of us. And it's partly challenging because we think about constraints as being limiting. You know, that if we have constraints, then I'm not going to be able to get it all done. And what happens when, you know, things change or whatever. And what we say in the book is that actually constraints foster productivity, creativity, and freedom. And so one of the things that I've found in my own life is that when I put hard edges on my day, I actually work from 9 to 3, so I only work a 6-hour day. And by the way, that's not essential to getting this double win, that we talk about in the book, winning at work and succeeding at life. You can kind of define that however you want. But for me, that's what my double win looks like, that I make better decisions with how I use my time when hard constraints are in place. All of a sudden the priorities become very clear. There's not enough time to do it all. There is enough time to do the most important things, but it's on me to really be clear about what those most important things are so I can focus on the highest leverage tasks and projects that I need to be attending to.
I think that requires some pretty awesome discipline to stick with that kind of schedule. I love the idea of a shorter workday. But I guess how then, let's take that as a good example.
Yep.
If you have a 6-hour workday, and let's say that you have, or the kind of person that I think that a lot of people are that listen to the show, high achievers, creatives, lots of ideas, lots of things they could pursue. How do you choose? How do you only say, well, I can't do the 100 ideas on my list. I can only do 4 of them. How do you break that down to make that choice?
Well, one of the things that we talk about in the book, really the first principle in practice, is around defining your own double win. And this is going to look different for all of us, but we walk you through a process of thinking about your non-negotiables in 3 categories. So the first one is self-care. The second one is your relational priorities. And the last one is your professional results. So self-care, relational priorities, and professional results. And what we really talk about as we're talking through these ideas in the book is that this is a performance strategy. So we're not talking about compromising your operating results or your financial results so that you can have more margin in your life. We want you to have more margin in your life, but we also want you to have awesome operating results. We want you to be able to produce fantastic results that you're responsible for in your professional context, whether you're a business owner or working for someone else, whatever that is. So part of this idea of non-negotiables is getting really clear on what are the professional results that are non-negotiable for me. For example, in my case, I'm the CEO. I have to deliver the annual budget. So if I'm not prioritizing that, if other things are crowding that out of my workday, or another one for me is envisioning the future. If I'm not spending sufficient time envisioning the future of our business, there's no way I can lead my team there, right? So I've got it, when I'm looking at my calendar, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit in that process. We talk about scheduling what matters. If I'm not scheduling those non-negotiables, the things that matter most, then other things that are less important, maybe shiny object syndrome, those are going to crowd out the most important things. So I really think a lot of the ability to win at work and succeed at life, this idea of the double win, is made possible by the clarity we have around the most important non-negotiables in our lives in these 3 categories.
Yeah, one thing I just thought of when you're mentioning this idea of a non-negotiable is that my last day job that I had, it was one of those kind of, I would say like a typical job where your boss says when you first get hired, here are the things you're responsible for. But then you find out very quickly, I actually have to do a lot of other things too. And as there's more added to my plate in this last position, I had this talk with my boss where it said, like, you're asking me to do all these other things, but you're not going to fire me if I don't do those new things, but you will if I don't do the core things I was hired for.
Yes.
And so I had that kind of conversation of, what am I actually required to do? Because those things for me have to get my first priority because I don't want to lose my job. So
exactly.
Is that part of this process too, to have those conversations?
Yes. It really is. And what we want to do is shift our thinking from accomplishing tasks to accomplishing outcomes. What are the results and outcomes that you're responsible for? Because for most of us, whether you work for yourself or you work for someone else, our paychecks are dependent on accomplishing outcomes and results. That's why we were hired. No one is looking at your task list and making sure you checked everything off, usually, unless you have an incredibly micromanaging boss. Usually what's happening is they're holding you responsible for delivering certain outcomes and results. And so when you think about, okay, if I got clear on what those are, and then I got clear on how do those relate to each other, which ones are the most important, which ones are literally non-negotiable. Like you said, if I don't do these things, I might get fired, or I might not have a business, or I might not be able to pay my employees. We need to be really clear on what those things are so that the other things that don't meet that criteria are really kind of secondary on the list. We're not talking about non-negotiables like what are all the things you'd love to do. We're talking about what are kind of like the bare minimum in terms of your performance for self-care, relational priorities, and professional results. If you can get clear on those, I promise you have enough time to do those things. You probably will have to let go of other things, but it will be okay because, as Stephen Covey used to say, the big rocks would be in first. There'd be room for your big rocks.
Yeah, I mean, along those same lines, I mean, you mentioned this idea of having a calendar and you're scheduling what matters. What's
Yes.
that process like to say that someone has identified, okay, here are the 3 or 4 things I want to do every week? Do you go about just saying that before the week begins, like, here is my calendar, here are blocks of time where I'm going to do these important
Yes.
things? Like, what does that look like in a practical sense of actually booking your time?
Well, if you think about it, most of us, the way we handle our calendars is other people put their priorities in our calendar, and then we take whatever's left and try to look at our own priorities and see how we can squeeze that in, right? Instead, it's kind of like if you think about a budget. If you try to save after you've spent all month long and whatever you have left over is going to be kind of your saving strategy, you're probably going to have like $5 left, right? I mean, it's just kind of the way that the life works. We're going to use all the resources we have. And instead, if you start and you say, no, I'm going to prioritize at the beginning, I'm going to save money first, and then I'm going to spend what's left. I'm going to decide what my vision is for savings, and then I'm going to figure out how to live on the rest. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So, different context, but the same principle. We want to make sure that before the rest of your schedule gets filled up with things that are important to other people. And I understand we all have to have things on our calendar that are important to other people and maybe less important to us. But we've got to kind of take a stand proactively for the things that matter most in our lives, including our self-care and our relational priorities, because if those things get neglected, then as it turns out, they back up into our professional lives and our ability to produce those professional results. So that's why that hierarchy is there when we're talking about these non-negotiables.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. There's definitely a focus that I've taken for years is what I call like a health first approach. So I'm looking at
Yeah,
my calendar and asking, like, how do I make sure that I don't burn out this week? Like, how do I make sure I have enough
right.
sleep? And I know that
Exactly.
that is the opposite approach most of us take. If we say like, well, I'm going to be at work for 10 hours a day and I'll sleep when I die. It's like that. It backfires. I mean, I had definitely have experienced burnout in the past, and because of that, I don't want that in my future. And I feel
Right.
like there has to be this intentional focus on, if my health is first, if my self care is first, that changes kind of the way that you map out your time.
It really does. And what you'll find is while you may be spending less time working, and hopefully that is exactly what you're going to be experiencing. That's what we
Right.
want for you. You will not be accomplishing less. You'll actually be accomplishing more. So, we talk in the book about this idea of, either the hustle fallacy or the ambition break. And the hustle fallacy is all about, well, like you said, I'll sleep when I die. I guess I'm just going to have to double down here for a little while until this project's launched or I finish this thing for my boss or I start a new business or whatever. And it'll be worth it. I'll have to neglect my health and my most important relationships for a little while, but it'll be worth it. Of course, we all know it doesn't usually turn out to be worth it. It usually turns out to be a disaster. And those temporary things have a way of becoming permanent. Or the flip side, the other option that's presented us is this idea of the ambition break. Well, we say to ourselves, I guess I'm not going to be able to reach my professional potential. I guess I'm just going to have to tap that ambition break, but at least I won't be neglecting my health and my most important relationships. And what we say in this book, Win at Work and Succeed at Life, is no, your work and the rest of your life don't actually have to be in opposition to each other. We can actually come up with a third option, this idea of the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life, where these things are mutually reinforcing in how you attend to your personal life actually makes you perform better at work, and how you perform at work and the decisions you make there enables you to perform better in the rest of your personal life. They don't have to be at odds with one another. It's just that we're presented with these two kind of crummy options, and that's really why we wrote the book, is to say, hey, there's a third way that not a lot of people are talking about, and it's totally doable and it's so rewarding.
There's one thing that I know I've kind of experienced personally that I'm sure others do as well, especially high achievers, which is when you decide, okay, I'm going to work less and I'll have maybe a day off occasionally or
Yeah.
less time. There's a guilt that comes from not working, or this kind of
Yes.
this mindset that says, well, if I'm not in the office, then I'm doing something wrong. And
Yeah.
how do we get kind of that mental, like, our mindset shift to say, like, it's good to have time off. It's good to be with my family. It's good to not work constantly. Like, can we
Yeah.
get to a place where we feel good about the double win?
I think we can. One of the things I want to say too that we didn't talk about at the beginning, but one of the reasons that people overwork, you talked about, kind of settling in at home and how that can be difficult sometimes. When we're at work, I mean, first of all, for a lot of us, work is really fun. We love
Mm,
work, and that's great. That's like a great problem to have. We have our clients off come in when they start with us and they'll say things like, well, my hobby is work. I'm a business owner. I love to work, and we're like, yeah, but not so much, and for sure, people love to work, but also work is where we get our sense of identity in many cases, or where the place where we've decided to get it. It's the place where we get kind of that pat on the back, where we can check things off the list, where the wins are definable. Sometimes home can be messy. It can be hard. The wins, it's a long game that we're playing. If we're raising children, for example, or taking care of elderly parents, it can be a lot. It can be demanding. So there's some empathy around that. But yeah, I think that we have to realize that as human beings, there are at least 10 domains of life. Work is only one. And that this takes a little practice if you're a high achiever, but that non-achievement is actually incredibly powerful. We dedicate a whole chapter in the book on this. And part of the reason for that is because it rejuvenates our body and our mind to set us up for making our best contribution at work. I mean, just think for a second about when you had the last best idea you've had for your work, for your job or your business. Probably wasn't while you were sitting at your desk, right? I mean, it was out. Maybe you were on a run, maybe you were in the shower, maybe you were on a hike. I don't know, whatever your thing is. And in those rare moments when you give yourself a little margin to go do something that's non-achievement oriented, I bet you had tons of ideas that came up for your business, and that's in part the power of non-achievement. Besides just having a more interesting and fulfilling life, it also gives our brain and our body the space that it needs to prepare for innovation and creativity. If we're just constantly slogging through, we deplete our creative reserves. We really don't have a lot to bring to the table. And so this is, from a performance strategy standpoint, non-achievement is one of the most powerful weapons that we can use.
No, I definitely fall into that category of someone who certainly, I need that time off, and when I have it, it's incredible how quickly I get new, fresh ideas.
Right.
And I think that one area of my life I've noticed that happens most often is when I do a couple of things. First is that I slow my pace quite a bit. And the second is that I'll only allow myself to really focus on one or two big things at a time. And I know that for me, I can't function if I'm trying to do 7 projects simultaneously, so I just don't anymore.
Yeah.
And how do we get to a place where we can identify okay, I'm only going to do a couple of big things, and that's going to drive the results I'm going for? And I ask this question from the perspective of, we often think that everything is important, but that's not really how it plays out. How do we know, okay, this is the next most important focus for me right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. First of all, being clear on what the professional results are that you're responsible for. But then, we have a practice that is in our Full Focus Planner product. We have this 90-day planner called the Full Focus Planner. And in that planner, we really work to connect your annual goals to your daily actions. And we do that through a couple different ways. We ask you to set 10 to 12 goals per year, but to do no more than 3 per quarter. So right there, you're focused on 3 things or fewer per quarter that are kind of your primary things that you're focused on. Then we're going to ask you to, on a weekly basis, to look at your list of goals, to look at the projects that you have, and to identify what are the weekly big 3 outcomes that you need to accomplish this week to move you closer toward those annual goals or other projects that you have. And then on a daily basis, what are the big 3 tasks that you need to accomplish? If you don't get anything else done in your day, what are the top 3 priorities that you have, discrete tasks that you need to accomplish? Everything else is gravy, if you get that done, but we're not trying to get 40 things done. We're trying to really look at that long task list that we have and pick out the 3 things that are really your daily big 3. They're the most important high leverage tasks that are really going to move the needle on your goals and most important projects. And I think most often we don't stop and ask those questions. I mean, half the battle here is taking the time, and it doesn't take a lot of time, but taking the time to get clear on what matters most at, kind of a macro level, but also at a micro level.
I have a little dry erase board on my desk with my top 3 things for today. And
That's
talking
awesome.
to you is number 2. So I've got that written down right there. And so I think that fits really well because this is a practice that I've tinkered with in the past, but never really committed to until recently.
Yeah.
And I have, I'm a digital guy. So everything I do is on the computer.
Right.
But to have that physical ability to write down, today I'm going to do just these 3 things, or at least just do these 3 things before I do other things.
Right. That's kind of the big idea.
That has really helped to clarify for me, this matters most now. Stay focused, do this. Because I have a tendency to get really distracted.
Sure.
And if I have this, a list literally on my desk right in front of
Yep.
me, like I have found that to be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm looking at my version of that right now. You're number one on my list, and then I've got a couple other things that are happening today that are really important. And that keeps me focused, so that when I get up and go get a cup of coffee or some water, and I come back and I have to reorient myself and sit down again, I don't have to try to figure out and ask that question all over again. Hey, what's important? I can just look over at my list, and I know I've already decided when things were quiet this morning and my kids weren't awake at my house. I decided what are my 3 most important tasks that I need to accomplish today. And that kind of clarity enables us to stay on task. And maybe most importantly, it keeps us from getting overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, we don't make good decisions. We don't use our time well. We often overwork. There's all kinds of negative things that happen from that place.
Speaking of kids, my wife and I had our first child a couple of years ago, and so I've kind of entered into that world. I know that you've got kids as well, and that's the whole new kind of spectrum to view productivity through, because there's just such a different lens of priorities with children.
That's right.
And how does someone go about kind of making that, operate in a way that says, like, there's definitely time for my kids, but they don't kind of take over my entire life? And how do you find that balance where you feel like things are working without that sense of overwhelm that can easily come from that lifestyle?
Yeah. Well, so I have 5 kids. They're ages 20 to 2. I have 20, 17, 12, 10, and 2. So we have kids at all ages and all stages. And we've recently re-entered the toddler phase, which sounds like you're kind of in that range, which is like literally the craziest stage. It gets, spoiler alert, it gets way easier from there. So that's the good news.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Your house will not be taken over by toys forever. At some point they can put them away themselves. But, one of the things that I have found that is probably the most helpful with that issue of feeling like, golly, how do I make sure everybody gets the attention that they need? Putting constraints on my workday has been a game changer for me. So I actually started doing this because we adopted our 2 middle boys. Our younger 3 children are adopted, and our middle boys came home in 2011. They had some special needs, and I really was faced with a tough choice of, my dad was going along with our business. And he came to me and he said, I'm really feeling like the next right step for our business is for you to become the chief operating officer. And, that's going to free me up to do all these other things for the future. It's going to be awesome. And inside I was like, how am I going to do this with these kids that have all these needs, And so I thought about it and actually heard somebody speak, another woman who was a CEO, is really successful. And she said that she stopped work every day at 3:30 to pick her kids up from school. And I'm sitting in the audience and my head just exploded, wait, what? This is a thing? People are doing this? And as it turns out, not a lot of people are doing this, but it gave me permission to all of a sudden think out of the box. And I know not everybody can do this. And the point of our book and this whole concept is not that you need to end your workday at 3 or 3:30, but whether it's 3 o'clock, 3:30, or whatever, what that makes possible is, as I said to my dad in this story, I need to give my kids my full attention when I'm not at work. I can't be on when I'm not at work. I need to be totally productive at work, and then I need to shift gears. And so he was willing to try this as an experiment, and I've been doing it for years and years and years now. His only condition was, if you can deliver the operating results, then I'm okay with it. I've been able to do that consistently, and so it's worked really well. But I think the big idea in the application for everybody, regardless of your situation, is that, whether you choose 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 6:30 or whatever, if you can draw a hard line and say, this is when I start work and this is when I stop work, the stress in your life around kids, I can promise you, will go down exponentially. Because to me, as a mom of 5 kids, where the stress comes from is I'm trying to finish a phone call, work-related phone call, while getting my 2-year-old a snack, while reviewing homework at the island, while trying to think about dinner. And I get snappy and irritable. It's not a good situation. Same thing in the morning. What kills my morning ritual and the self-care things that I need to be in a strong place for both my business and for my family. If I'm trying to answer email at 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning, rather than working out or getting enough sleep or those kinds of things, it just kind of trashes the whole day. And so when we put these constraints in place, not only do we make better decisions about what kind of high leverage activities we're going to do throughout the day, but we also really free ourselves up to be present and on with our families or the people that we love most in our life when it's time to do that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a big shift. When my daughter moved to a new daycare, I did the pickup at 3:30. That's been my go-to for the last couple of years, and it's a game changer. It really is when I realized, well, first of all, I cannot work when she's at home. Like, it's just not going to happen.
It's impossible.
The distraction level is like extreme.
Yes.
And I love the idea, and now I'm like really excited about it. I love the idea of having that hard line to stop the workday, because then it says, well, wait a minute, if it's noon right now, I only have 3.5 hours left. What am I got to get done? And that changes the way that I choose what happens next. And
exactly.
That's such a powerful force there.
Yep, it really is. I mean, I actually think this is a big reason that I've been able to be as successful and our business has grown like it is that these kind of constraints force you to make better decisions. You're just not going to waste time on things that are low leverage because I mean, you've got a limited amount of time. I'm looking at my clock right now and, I just have a few hours before I'm going to go do that school pickup. And I love that it's a hard stop and literally kids are waiting on me. Like if I don't come, it's going to be a big problem. So I really have to be done. There's no fudging that. And that means the time between right now and that 3:00 leaving time, I'm going to make really good calls about how I spend my time because I don't have any time to waste.
One thing on this show that I love to ask my guests is about routines, and I feel like this is definitely a topic that fits this book really well and fits the work you guys are doing really well. So I want to hear from your personal perspective, if you wake up tomorrow morning with an ideal morning routine, what kinds of habits do you want to make sure are there to set the tone for your day?
Yeah, I love talking about this. And part of the reason I love talking about it is because I have been through a lot of different stages in my life when, for example, 2 years ago when we adopted our youngest daughter, she had some medical special needs. And, we went through all the normal things of not sleeping as a parent, but she had to eat more often than normal, all kinds of stuff. So my morning ritual was like tiny. It was like 10 minutes back then. So the reason I want to say that before I share what I'm doing now is because sometimes when people share this, it can be really discouraging if you're in a season of life where you have extreme limitations that you really can't do anything about, like little tiny kids, or brand new baby or whatever. What is also encouraging, I think, is that those seasons change. And while you're in a season that's more limited, my encouragement to you would be to just set the bar so low that no matter what happens, who was up all night or whatever, you can still do it, So just think in terms of that and not the ideal. But fast forward 2 years later, my morning routine begins at 5 a.m. I love that 5 a.m. hour.
There you go.
I go to bed at 9:00, so I get that 8 hours of sleep. That is probably the most important decision I make for my self-care is getting to bed on time. My day rises and falls based on that decision. When I get up at 5, I first of all, go get my coffee, and then I sit down and I do some kind of spiritual reflection time, some devotional time. Then I fill out my full focus planner for the day. I identify my daily big three and review my calendar. After that, I plan my food for the day, which is something that's kind of new for me in the last 8 or 10 months. I really felt like I wasn't focusing enough on just making sure I was feeding my body. Like I'm one of those people that can really easily skip meals and get too hungry and get hangry, and all that. And so I just, and also have decision fatigue. Like, oh, I got to make a decision for lunch. What do I want for lunch? So I just go ahead and plan that for the whole day that I don't have to think about it anymore. Then after that, I go upstairs to our little home gym that we kind of made work over COVID, which is awesome because I don't have to drive anywhere. And I do about a 45-minute workout up there, or I go out for a run. And then I just, shower and get ready for the day. So it's pretty simple. It's really all about those non-negotiables for self-care that set me up for productivity and kind of being centered and clear on what needs to be accomplished for the day. But I'm not really overly ambitious with it. I'm not spending tons of time reading at this season of my life. I usually do that while I'm working out, like listen to Audible while I'm working out and some other things. I want to make sure this is something I can consistently do at least 5 days a week. And it's working.
I like the idea of planning your food for the day. I feel like that's one thing people have missed. And it's I've not done this consistently over the years, but I've heard great success stories from people who've done this well. So how does that work for you? Are you just writing down like, this is what I'll prepare and when, or what, like practically speaking, like what are you focusing on to ensure like this is the plan for today? Yeah.
Well, I'm not really focusing on the time of day. So I kind of let my own hunger be the guide for that, which generally works out, around normal meal times. But I am wanting to be intentional about having foods that sustain me. So I don't really subscribe to the idea that there are bad foods, but I do want to make sure I'm including like getting enough protein at breakfast, so I'm not hungry by 9:30 or 10 in the morning. So I basically just pick what I want to have for breakfast, and usually I just have a couple different things that I rotate through. I don't personally feel that I need a lot of variety at that particular meal. And then I have a list of about 5 things that I rotate through that are takeout for lunch at the office. I decided, gosh, this is like a lot of decision fatigue. And if I could just come up with a list of things that I like that are pretty healthy that I could rotate through, gosh, that would be so great if I never had to think about it until I got tired of those 5 things. That'll last me for about 6 months before I'm ready to switch to something else. And then I make a meal plan that we work off of, and I just look at that and pull that for dinner. And then I have some options for snacks that I put on. But I really find that the further I get in my own journey as a leader, the more and more decisions I have to make. And the more decisions I need to try to not make. Wherever I can not have to make a decision and not have to use my creative thinking, I don't really want to spend that energy that's so valuable on what I'm going to have for lunch. So if I can eliminate that, and if I can think ahead in the morning, make those decisions and get a plan around my food when I'm in that place of my future self in the morning, which is kind of what I consider that planning time to be.
Yeah, that's definitely an effective way to look at it. I mean, anything that can reduce decisions, I think you're definitely right about that, because I have found, especially the more creative that I want to be and the more important the projects are, like if I devote a lot of energy to things that are less important, I'm just too tired, mentally too exhausted to do the hard work. And that to me has been, that's a big shift to make, to say, I'm going to automate the smaller stuff so I can just do the big things.
Right. And I just do this, by the way, in my notes app on my iPhone. I mean, this is not fancy. I'm just writing it down, and then I can look, what did I plan for snack? Great. Cheese and crackers and some fruit. Done. It's just so nice. Instead of standing at the pantry, like, what am I going to have? I don't have time to make lunch. I've already figured it out. It's just one less thing.
Megan, this has been an amazing conversation today. I've loved all this information. I know our listeners today want to dig in more to this book. Where can they learn more from you? Where can they get a copy of the book, and how can they dig in?
Yeah. So the best place to learn more about the book is at winandsucceedbook.com/miracle. So winandsucceedbook.com/miracle. There's some cool bonuses for your listeners that we put together. So guys, y'all don't want to miss out on that. And then if you just want to learn more about me or our company, Michael Hyatt and Company, you can just go to michaelhyatt.com.
Okay, perfect. I'll have those links for listeners this week in the show notes page. And Megan, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this today.
Me too, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. This has been awesome.
And for that action step this week, get your double win. It is possible to win at work and succeed at life, and Megan's new book will certainly help you get there faster. Once again, the book is Win at Work and Succeed at Life: 5 Principles to Free Yourself from the Cult of Overwork. JeffSanders.com/395 is the place to go to get the episode notes, including links, transcriptions, and more. That's all I've got for you this week here on the 5 a.m. Miracle Podcast. Until next time, you have the power to change your life, and the fun begins bright and early.